Monday, everyone. Today off of today's video, and we're going to be talking about asymmetries among rivals. And you're probably going, okay, what the heck is that? Well, Captain studied last night, and as you see here, he's all prepared for class with his bow tie on, looking very astute there, cattle dog. Free. But now you can be dismissed from class while I teach everyone else because you already studied. Okay, yesterday, this is a week in which I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining canine aggression, what to do about it if you own a dog that is aggressive. And yesterday we started this whole ball of wax with explaining why, from an evolutionary standpoint, your dog would ever even use aggression. Why do animals use aggression? Why are they willing to fight one another over a resource? Well, we kind of covered a little bit of territory yesterday, and we fell upon and utilized game theory. Game theory, again, was a model used by economists to predict human behavior in certain financial markets. But that was borrowed by a lot of animal ethologists and behaviorists to determine and predict the optimal behavior of animals when they're in the company of other animals and based upon their behavior as well. And what they found out is that it actually behooves the individual to improve their fitness if they employ aggression 57% of the time. In other words, a hawk strategy, where if I see a resource and I see a possible opponent, I'm going to just attack immediately. Kind of like shoot first, ask questions later mentality. That's what they said. So they came up with that 57%. And they also took into account that the cost of battle is relative to the benefit of winning that drives the fight intensity. In other words, the greater the resource, the more I'm willing to fight for it. We're going to learn a little bit about that today and what that means for your dog. But this model here that was utilized and really taught us a lot about the evolution of aggression was a basic model in which all the animals valued the resource the same. And all the animals had the same fighting ability. Hence why in the formula, when we arrived at the 57%, we used the equation, we divided by 2, because if everyone is the same, then you would have a 50-50 chance of winning that resource in any sort of battle, especially if you came across another hawk, if a dove came across a dove. So all that was put out yesterday, and we kind of went over that a little bit. So now I want to talk to you about asymmetries among rivals, because why this really doesn't exist. I'm sure it does on occasion, but there's really no equals among humans, there's no equals among dogs, and there's no equals among wolves and all the other animals in the animal kingdom. So this rarely fits. In fact, it actually drives this number 57% up for some individuals and far less for others. And here's why. When you take into account that we're not all equals, we have to, the way that we came about that and arrived at that conclusion was that we all have a different ability to fight. So talk about is fighting ability. What kind of fighting ability does your dog have? Fighting experience, that's taken into account. How often do you fight another animal? The value of the resource. Yeah, I mean, you drop a tub of cottage cheese right here between us, I'm not going to fight you over it. But if you drop maybe a Reese's cup or a cheeseburger, oh, we may get it on. So that counts a lot for dogs as well. And then finally, there's this arbitrary asymmetry. It counts. And so now let me show you how it counts with your dog, because that's the most important thing. We have to take these variables in, because if you've owned more than one lifetime, you know they're all different. They're individuals. So they count as far as this goes. So let's just go over it. Fighting ability. Fighting ability, one thing that we learned is that from the game theory, that most animals are going to utilize the hawk strategy, meaning I'm just going to attack. I'm not going to flee and I'm not going to bluff. I'm just going to attack. Most animals that employ the hawk strategy are larger, heavier, or have bigger weapons, meaning if you have two bighorn sheep that are about to fight it out over a male, even though one sheep may be larger than the other, if its opponent has larger horns, studies have shown that the larger sheep with smaller horns will actually not fight. They will just give up right then and there. So it does matter if you are bigger, if you are heavier, if you are smarter, faster, and if you have bigger weapons. And the more of these you have, you get a higher rating on what's called your resource holding potential. What is your ability to gain a resource, and once you gain it, to hold that resource? That all counts. Rivals assess each opponent's RHP. They do. When dogs, before they attack a human, before they'll attack their dog, they will very quickly try to assess their opponent's abilities. Their abilities. I've written about this in my book, The Hammer, Why Dogs Attack Us and How to Prevent It. I even told a funny story about the time that our little Morky Dave, I've shown you pictures of him, was willing to bite Kira over a Hershey bar. But he wasn't willing to fight me over the Hershey bar. He determined that my RHP was greater than his. So in short, animals will play hawk, utilize the hawk strategy from our game theory if they're larger, and often use the dove strategy if they're smaller or weaker. And speaking of that, some animals are just not good. And those animals at assessing their own RHP. Now, these would be dogs who are under-socialized. They have not been in the company of other dogs, or they have not been in the company of unfamiliar people. So only when you're in that company of other dogs and people do you learn from trial and error, free exploration, cause and effect. You start to adjust your own RHP value. But those who don't have that opportunity are not able to assess their own RHP. And studies have shown that they tend to assess themselves as weak. Instead of going, well, heck, if I'm going to assess myself, I'm going to think I'm the biggest, baddest thing in the neighborhood. But they don't. Because again, why? Because combat is costly. It's very dangerous, and at a metabolic rate, it's incredibly costly. So therefore, I don't really want to fight you to begin with, and if I can't assess my RHP, I'm just going to assume the worst case scenario and figure out that I'm probably weaker than you are. So studies have shown that animals who can assess it will assess themselves as weak, and they give up easily. That counts. The strong attack. So as we get into this week, I'm going to be talking about why is there a value in you being perceived by your dog as stronger than it? If it assesses that your RHP is greater than its RHP, then again, we have the support of many, many studies that shows that that animal gives up easily. I didn't have to duke it out with little Dave. I knew he had the Hershey bar. I knew he tried to bite Kira. I said, move. And he did. He walked away from the Hershey bar and I took it. I didn't have to have a battle because my RHP was higher at that time than Kira's. Now notice I say at that time. Kira's RHP value has risen quite drastically from those many years ago. All right, so what's the next one? Fighting experience. Oh my gosh, I tell people all the time. We are the only species that will carry 2 suitcases with us into the future with all encounters. We will carry winnings and losings. Your dog doesn't, and neither does any other animal in the animal kingdom. We're the only ones that do that. So fighting experience counts. Outcomes of battles determine future strategies. Future strategies. So therefore, if your dog, for example, and when I say battle, I'm not meaning always with domestic dogs, physical combat. I'm meaning the delivery person shows up at the door. Your dog immediately charges that door, employs the hawk strategy, but there's a door keeping it from getting to the delivery person. But nevertheless, it tries, rah, 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 hits that door like a freight train. The delivery person sets down their goods and they leave. Ha! That worked like a champ. Oh, I have to remember that, by golly. Every time that darn thing shows up, just go immediately for that hawk strategy, and lo and behold, they disappear. Also, this happens on walks. Dog's on a leash. You're walking. Another dog is approaching. Oh, I'm telling you what, I'm just going to immediately attack that thing because it is on my perceived territory, or it may want my owner, or you might even be a threat to me. Maybe you're looking at me like you want to own something over here. So I immediately employed that hawk strategy. I launched the end that leash, rah, 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 and by golly, those people keep going because maybe they lived that way. So they went that way regardless of what your dog did, but your dog perceives that as a battle in which it won. Same thing happens at windows. Rah, rah, rah. Person walks by the front of your house, they disappear. Dog goes, wow, that worked. Happens all the time. Happens to you. Okay, I'm eating. You approach. Your dog goes, it doesn't attack immediately. It just goes for the dove. But some dogs will attack. Either way, if my growling works, I will employ it again. It always dictates outcomes of battles, always determine future strategies. Now keep this in your head. Just like up here. If I can have my dog assess that my RHP is stronger than its RHP, then I can predict from all of nature's teachings and all the studies and all the conclusions that have been arrived from all these studies that the animal will assess itself as weaker than me and it will give up easily. Same thing goes for fighting experience. The loser effect creates a long-lasting effect. It lasts a long time. If I lose, that means something to me. I keep that inside of me for a long time. Prior losers gave up without challenging their opponents. And every study that was ever done, ranging anything from copperhead snakes to hummingbirds, even to elephant seals, and of course our social predators that we have out there. So we have so much proof to understand this, which means, hey, tell you what, when it comes to fighting me, this isn't going to work. I'm going to give you an option other than the H option, the hawk option. Why don't we just go for a different option altogether? We'll talk about that here in a second. So again, it's up to us to determine to make sure the dog has the experience in which, wow, going for you or going for the other dog or whatever, I'm going to kind of lose here. And because of that, then that will determine which strategy they use in the future. So again, when we talk about deactivation, when you hear me use that word later this week, this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to deactivate that behavior. I'm going to change your fighting experience. All right, and the next thing is the value of resource to the individual. Food, for example, is more precious to a starving animal. I witnessed this many times up close and personal with wolves. I wrote about this in the final chapter of my book, The Hammer, Why Dogs Attack Us and How to Prevent It. Read that final chapter. You will read in that chapter in which I witnessed only from about 50 feet away a starving animal, and that's all I'm going to say because there's a spoiler alert there, a starving animal take on two healthy, well-fed wolves over meat that I'd used to bait just so I can understand and track how many wolves lived in that area. It took them on and it won. So again, depending upon the value that you place on an object or a value you place on food or the value you place on a mate or territory, the more value you place, the more you're willing to persist in the battle. You're more willing to take on that hawk attitude, even if I feel that my RHP is lower than yours. So that's one of the ones that will trump that. It just depends upon the value of it. For dogs, it can be food. That's number one. Will always be number one of all time. Will always be food. Always. Life is an exchange of energy for more energy. We covered that yesterday. Toys. Yeah, you know, Captain of Ball. He loves his ball. Beds for some dogs. My bed. And then territory. And we'll discuss more about territories tomorrow. But here's the neat thing about this though. Once food, for example, let's go back to my starving animal. Once food has been eaten, the value of the remaining prey or food decreases drastically. So let me use the example. Maybe you have a dog that is food aggressive. All right, every mouthful of food that he takes or she takes, the chances of the dog now attacking another dog or person lessen drastically. So think about you. You're sitting down, you haven't eaten all day long, you're really, really, really hungry, and you're like, Kira has prepared for me my favorite meal. Well, I start diving into it. And suddenly one of our teenagers, or our only teenager actually, reaches across the table and tries to take some of my food. And I go, excuse me, get your hand away from my food. Absolutely. That's my food. But should he reach over in about 10 minutes, maximum for me, because I'm a fast eater, well, you can have whatever I have left over. I really just don't care. And the same thing goes for toys. If a dog chews on a toy or a stuffed toy and thrashes it for about 10 minutes, they're usually done with it. Same thing goes with bones, bin of bones, you name it. After a while, every moment, every second, every mouthful, I start dropping down in my drive and my willingness to fight over it. And later we will talk about treats and how the exact same thing happens when you're giving treats to a dog. They lose their effectiveness quickly. Animals that know more about a resource will value it more. The more I know about it, the more I will value that resource. Dogs thrive on the familiar. So this is going to play hand in hand. We talk a little bit tomorrow about territorial aggression. Why it's important that you understand what it is, exactly what it is, and how we actually label it differently than territorial aggression nowadays. And when I say nowadays, as of the last few years, and why this is going to play an important role when you go on these walks and when people come over to your home like guests. So that'd be very valuable. But for now, just kind of know this. The more I know about a resource, the more I'm willing to defend it. So for a wild animal, that would be kind of like my territory. If I know where the shelter is, if I know where the water source is, if I know where the food source is, all of these things give me the ability and the desire to want to defend it against those, me as the resident, against those as the intruders. So this plays a value as well. And then finally, we work our way all the way over here to arbitrary asymmetry. And really, that can be many things, but the thing that matters the most to us is that animals do take ownership of certain objects. They can take ownership of you. Many times you can be petting a dog, and another dog in your household walks up, and that dog immediately attacks it, employing the hawk strategy right at that moment, or maybe even the dove strategy. Snarl, display. Why? Because you have become that resource. And we see that a lot with SBAs, secure base attachments, that are just a little bit outside the box of normality, where dogs view they morph from I dig you to I have to have you. If I don't have you, then I will certainly perish. So the higher that thing goes up, then the more value you're going to be, and the more they're going to be willing to fight over it. And those are usually dogs up here that will employ the hawk strategy versus the dove strategy. But outside of that, it can be prior ownership. So case in point, we've owned multiple dogs in our household. Multiple dogs. Captain, for example, or Dave, and maybe I should use Dave over Captain. Dave is very possessive about anything that we give him. If you give him any sort of bully stick, you give him a chew toy of any sort, antler, it doesn't matter. Once he gets it, he owns it. He owns it. Animals live by the principle of ownership is 9/10 of the law, period. Possession is 9/10 of the law for ownership. Now, if he leaves that and another animal approaches that object, he'll attack. And back he comes again. Boom. Even though he was finished with it. I chewed that so much, my jaws are killing me. However, I don't want you to have it. I don't want you to have it. And many times they'll just go over and try and sneak it away from them and haul it off, spit it out of their mouth, and not even touch it again. But I don't want you having it. So you got to pay attention to all of these as you assess whether or not your dog is going to attack you, or if your dog is going to attack another person or another dog. All of these come into effect. So just real quick, in a quick summary, we got to look at fighting ability. Has your dog, what does your dog have from a genetic baseline? Is it bigger, stronger? Does it perceive that in comparison to the human that's approaching it? or the other dog? We will be assessing that this week. But the biggest thing to take away from it is that if they assess that their RHP is less than that of their perceived opponent, then they will give up easily. Wow, that's really important. Okay, and then the fighting experience. Wow, every time your dog has a perceived success, it's going to determine future outcomes, future strategies every single time. So that's why we have to lessen those. We have to stop them. We have to mitigate the number of times that your dog succeeds in lunging at people, lunging at doors, lunging at people, barking its head off. All these sort of things that just drive us crazy and can also cause us a lot of anguish if someone else gets hurt. So we have to take this into account. The loser effect is long lasting. By golly, I'm going to show you how to achieve the loser effect without losing your dog. Had to do it with Captain. You don't see him all upset, do you? It can be done. If it's done in a logical sequence, the way I'm going to show you this week, you'll get it done. The value of the resource, that's individual. It's individual with your dog, it's individual with you. Keep an eye on it. If you own your dog for even a little bit of time, a week or two, you will start to be able to catalog very quickly what items, food or object, other or otherwise, does your dog consider really valuable. Just keep in mind, the more valuable it is, the more I'm willing to fight over it. But also the more I have it around me and the more I get to enjoy it, then the less I'm willing to really fight over it because I'm kind of done with it, kind of over it. And then lastly, possession is everything, meaning dogs will take ownership of objects, food areas, yards, vehicles, owners. The list goes on and on and on. And once they have that ownership, they're not in a sharing mood. Okay, so is it starting to make sense to you now? Are you starting to pick up the puzzles? Do you see why I went this route? Why I covered game theory with you yesterday so you understand that aggression is natural to your animal? It's not like a human. It's natural. And you know what? It is like a human. We're naturally aggressive as well. Just put us in the right circumstance and you're going to come out swinging. Now you understand that not all opponents are equal. You're not equal to your dog. At any moment, your RHP is higher or lower than theirs. Now you see what I'm talking about? So stay with me, guys. It's building. All of these puzzles, if you're paying attention, writing the stuff down, a big picture will develop here very quickly. And once you have that, now I can start to show you what I do, and it will make perfect sense to you. And you will start to do it. And when you do, then we are going to live in a world in which we have control over our animals. And I cannot tell you how important that is. Just go for a walk. I've never seen so many dogs being walked. I didn't even know this many dogs lived near me. But boy, it's been a challenge. I've done my part to maintain social distancing, but those retractable leashes with these aggressive dogs have not. They immediately invade my space. They immediately invade the space of my dog. And we have barely escaped several dog fights here just in the last couple of weeks, or attacks to us. So again, imagine the world that we can have when everyone knows the real reasons why dogs will attack, and we step in and employ techniques and strategies that will stop that from happening. So it's building, guys. If you're hanging in there, great. Because you're going to learn. Tomorrow, more to cover. And then after that, dust off your leash. It's time to get busy. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And of course, by the way, you know what to do. Share it if you find it valuable. And if you know someone else that would find it valuable, share it with them. Keep this ball rolling, everyone. We all need this. In the meantime, till I see you tomorrow, stay safe and study like Captain. Wear your bow tie. I'll see you tomorrow.